While some people argue how one Fallout game is better than the other, I've always had a special place in my heart for Fallout 3. It's grimy, has memorable characters, and allows you to adopt people as if they were your own. The DLC that most revolves around that last part there is the Pitt. Plagued by a virus, the walled city has two different sides of a similar coin. One side works, the other works the workers. While a typical conflict in both fictional writing and history, Fallout 3 handles it a little bit differently. You are tasked with breaking into the city as a slave and working your way up the food chain before deciding the ultimate fate for all the people within. While this is a strange thing for an 18-year-old straight out of an underground vault with no combat experience, that's exactly what we're going to be doing today. Can you beat Fallout 3's The Pitt at level 1? Starting off, I'm faced with the bright lights that plague those of us who refuse to sleep, before naming myself the exact opposite of what Ringo's armpits smell like. Who knew they made lavender deodorant in the wasteland? Taking my first steps towards my dad and trapping myself in the baby pen with him so that I could be the danger rather than be in danger, I select my special stats. As someone who hasn't played Fallout 3 nearly as much as New Vegas, I really have no clue what I'm doing, so I just replicate the stats I normally use. Excuse slightly less luck and intelligence for more strength. After grabbing the Pit Boy, running past a woman who just wants you to appreciate her wonderful poetry, talking with one of my favorite side characters, and shooting a few targets, I check my difficulty. The difficulty scaling in Fallout 3 is a little bit more relaxed in my opinion, so I cranked that puppy up to very hard, and proceed to destroy the cutest little radroach that I've ever seen. I say radroach instead of what I want to actually call them because YouTube finds my humor repulsive, but that doesn't stop me from getting checked out by my stepdad, grabbing the medicine bobblehead, punching Butch, and selecting my tag skills. I went with more medicine, melee weapons, and sneak at first, but decided that the quality of my gear was more important than my ability to not be seen. This was done because if high school was any indication of how much I'll be seen, I should be as visible as a needle in a haystack. If you didn't get the joke isn't about you. After grabbing everything in my bedroom, including my massive collection of toys shaped like cucumbers and eggplants, I started speedrunning through the vault. Nothing crazy happens here as I just follow Amada through the vault, get clinically depressed after seeing Jonas laying lifelessly on the ground with blood still pooling out of his head, and running out of the rather large urethra. After completing the quest Escape, you were immediately rewarded with enough experience to level up. If I hated my life or was as hard on myself as I was in middle school, I'd consider this already a failed run. Without console commands or extensive glitches, there is no way to exit the vault at level 1, meaning that no, you can't beat the Pitt DLC at level 1. Since I just want to take a trip down nostalgia lane anyways, I push through by bumping up my melee weapons and grabbing the Little Leaguer perk before taking a glance at my Pit Boy to see where we'd be heading. If you've been a long-time fan of the channel and have an impeccable memory, you'll know that I use console commands to get to the Point Lookout DLC. This time around, as evident by the footage that Owl in the future is likely choosing to put at what you're currently seeing if you aren't visually impaired, I manually transported my meat bag to where I needed to be. It was actually a relatively smooth journey. I will talk about the path I took and do a fancy animation of how I got there, but my fingers are already tired enough after visiting your mom last night. Owl has fallen so far that he's now making jokes about your mom. Truly a sad display of human character. After buying flowers to mend the damage dealt, I start getting my butt ate, and not in the way I like. The biggest issue preventing me from getting to the start of the DLC was vicious dogs. I had tried not to kill them out of the sake of preventing me from gaining XP, but this one in particular had followed me longer than my YouTube channel has existed, so I opted to put it down. Getting to Mr. Wiener, I used half of my bullets to take down the two raiders before learning about what is actually going on. Essentially, Warner escaped a ruined city full of bad things, and because he knows something about being railed, he is being hunted by all of his prior dominatrixes. It's a sad deal, but as someone who went through the same thing in 2011, I knew I needed to help him. I killed Ben Canning and a vicious dog before heading into the urethra that would take me where I needed to be. If you aren't familiar with the way that I do these level 1 challenges, I strip all of the clothing from my muscular body, so that I could face the true test of survival like Naked and Afraid. While this is stupid, a lot of things in my life are, like heading off into the pit. One obnoxiously bright fade away later, and we are in a gunfight with Warner doing most of the fighting, and me just collecting as much gear from their corpses as I can. I really wasn't sure at this point how this DLC was going to be, so I just kinda hoarded everything until the shooting finally stopped, and I had another meeting with Warner. After that delightful conversation, I had started sneaking towards the main entrance. Despite not bumping up my sneak, I was more than far enough away from the enemies to my left to avoid being seen. But the real doozy was the bridge that I had to cross. Landmines filled the grounds, half covered after clipping through the terrain. A sniper shoots from above, forcing me to use what little bit of ammo that I had collected. Slaves run for their lives, trying to escape a life of torment within the pit. While the journey across the bridge was filled with blockades, one light at the end of the tunnel did exist. A slave outfit. Now I could roleplay as one of those girls from Comic-Con who have daddy issues and have a need to show off every single one of their tattoos. Knowing full well that I also have daddy issues, I willingly walk into the warm embrace of Mex, a hot middle-aged man with some spiked armor and an inkling to put me back into my cage. I tell him that I'd like that, and before long, I am even more of a bottom than before. The pit is a mess. Workers cut metal day after day, but we learn the sparks of rebellion grow as we talk with Medea. After the pep talk of the century, I walk through the mill. One of the things I really love about Fallout 3 that was so well done is the environment. While a lot of people joke that the whole game is green, everything feels like it was done with purpose. Between the NPCs and environmental noise, this place really comes together nicely. Another thing that's nice is Nargo giving me an auto axe. The same weapon you saw when you clicked on the thumbnail, this thing is devastating, but we'll show that in a bit after we're introduced to Everett. Everett oversees a steelyard and sends slaves out to their deaths. Of course, since I'm an independent femboy, I ignore him and start my new profession. If you haven't played this DLC, there is a section where you have to go into a train yard full of steel bars that you need to collect to supposedly aid in building the city. The twist that makes it feel a little bit different than the first 30 minutes of Minecraft can be found in the creatures called trogs. Trogs are mutated humans that hop around to the ground like frogs, but other than looking a lot like my ex-girlfriend when she wanted to roleplay as a chick from a horror film, they're actually rather harmless. Between a few stem packs and every emo's dream Christmas gift, I'm able to perform a complicated series of incisions like I do for my day job. While this was incredibly fun for me, believe it or not, I actually really like Fallout 3, I could see how this gameplay might not be satisfying for you, the viewer. In light of that, and the fact that I can only record things that are interesting to save hard drive space on my 8-year-old PC, I have another story for you. I haven't always been a thrill seeker, but when Emerald suggested we go for a second date to an escape room, I was all in. We made our way to the building after class and we were greeted by a creepy looking building with a sign that read Escape Manor. I felt a mix of excitement and nerves as we walked inside, but Emerald's smile shifted her freckles around on her face and I knew that it'd be a great time. The room we were given was dimly lit, filled with ominous props. There was a timer on the wall, and we had exactly 1 hour to solve the puzzles and the escape room. The pressure was on, but we were ready for the challenge. As soon as the door closed behind us, we started looking for clues. We searched through drawers and cabinets, pulled levers, and tried to decipher hidden messages. We were making good progress as a team, bouncing ideas off of one another, but the clock was ticking. Suddenly, we had heard a loud noise coming from the wall. It sounded like a secret compartment opening. We rushed over to investigate and found a small door behind a painting. Inside, we found a key and a note that read, "The key to freedom is not in your hands, but in your mind." We knew this was a clue. After all, a key is usually pretty important, but we weren't sure what it meant. We tried to think outside of the box and come up with new ideas, but as we brainstormed, we started to hear strange noises coming from the ceiling. It sounded like someone crawling through the ventilation. We looked up and saw a vent in the ceiling. We knew we had to climb up and investigate. Emerald being the petite woman that she was and me being the beefy jock, I lifted her up like an overhead press, and she used the screwdriver we had found earlier to unscrew the vent. She managed to find something, and I let her down. Looking in her hands, she was holding yet another key. We used the key to unlock another door, and we were one step closer to escaping the manor. We found a book with a strange code and a symbol, copying the same one we found on a keypad next to the exit, and we knew we had to decode it to get through the metal bars blocking the door. We had worked together to solve the code, but time was running out. We had just 5 minutes left. Suddenly, Emerald had an idea. She entered the code in a different way, and it worked. The bars moved away from the door, and we had used the final key to open the door, allowing us to escape the room. We were ecstatic as we walked into the cool air. It was one of the most thrilling experiences of my life. I felt a sense of accomplishment and pride that we were able to solve the puzzles and escape in time. I was curious though, how did she figure out the code? I turned and looked at her, our faces inches apart from our arms being locked together, and asked, "So what was the answer to the code?" "If you really want to know, you'll have to come back to my apartment and beg me for it." At first I was taken off guard, but it wasn't long before I was fully adapted to what the pit had in store for me. I scoured for supplies, grabbed every steel bar I could get my hands on, and uncovered the fates of those who were tasked to do the same challenge as me. Speaking about challenges, despite playing on very hard difficulty, this was honestly a breeze. I had plenty of stim packs and was able to sleep to regenerate my health. But the real savior here was the auto axe and their unique versions. I was able to tear through anything, but its durability doesn't last very long. Another thing that spikes things up a little bit were all the wildmen in the steelyard. As you probably saw in the building we explored, they are all over the place and can be seen hoarding sweet steel bars. I really don't know how many you need to advance the story along, but I just collected them until I got bored. This of course took me a while, so I ended up somewhere in the 90s. Without a guide, I really don't believe it's possible to find all 100 of them, because some of them are so hidden that they remind me how deep I am in the closet. I did also find a combat shotgun at one point, which I was pretty stoked about, but unfortunately the quality of it was trash, so I wasn't able to use it as much as what I have in the past. After killing a few more wildmen, I remembered that I have to climb up the giant tower that almost reminds you of Corvega in Fallout 4. This giant masterpiece of murder houses more trogs and wildmen, but since I'm at such a low level, higher enemies don't spawn very frequently. This combined with my ridiculously high melee skill allows me to tear through anything. I'd be interested to try this challenge again, only using guns, as it actually seemed like there would be enough ammo to be able to survive, but that'll probably be a while because of this challenge run. Looking ahead at the footage coming up in the steelyard, nothing that you haven't already seen grabs my attention. Just more fighting to survive. Survival is a funny thing. In the present day, we have everything. While I'm aware that some countries and classes don't have access to the bare minimum for survival, and that is a very real issue, a large majority have everything. Food, water, shelter, and entertainment, all at our fingertips. But one thing that can take away all of your resources is nature. Nature decides if you deserve to live or die, and it's one of the things that, despite being highly risky at times, I like to do. I'd always been fascinated by the mountains. The rugged terrain, the sweeping vistas, and the sheer challenge of hiking through them had always called out to me. So when the opportunity arose to take a solo trip to the mountains, I jumped at the chance. I arrived at the trailhead early in the morning, excited and eager to begin my journey. The trailhead was quiet, and the only sound was the rustling leaves as the wind blew through the trees. I took a deep breath and began my hike. I never like to go to popular hiking trails during busy times, as it seems that other hikers can take away from the experience. But of course, this also means that you are alone should something go wrong. Personally, I would recommend that you don't follow in my footsteps and find someone that you trust with your life to go hiking with you. Since I don't have that relationship with anyone but my dog and she couldn't come with me on this trip, I went alone. The trail was steep and challenging, but I was determined to reach the summit. As I climbed higher, the air grew thinner, and my breath became more labored. But I kept pushing on, my eyes fixed on the trees in the distance. It was cold and wet, but very little snow was present, and I had dressed appropriately with several layers, thick gloves, and waterproof boots. As I found myself about 3/4 of the way to the summit, my ankle slipped on a wet rock. I felt a sharp pain trail up my right leg. I sat down, took off my boots, and gazed at my swollen ankle. Panic set in as I realized that I was alone. Fortunately, I carry a well-packed bag. I wrapped my ankle in Koban and glanced at my satellite phone. I knew I wanted to keep going, but my ankle was throbbing, and every movement was agony. I closed up my pack, took a few deep breaths, and forced myself to stand up, gritting my teeth against the pain. I slowly made my way up the trail. Each step a struggle. My progress was painfully slow, and every time I put weight on my right foot, the pain shot through my ankle. I was sweating and panting, and my heart was pounding in my chest. The trail became steeper and more treacherous. I had to rely on my hiking poles to keep my balance. My ankle was now aching so badly that I could barely stand it, but I was determined to reach the summit, no matter the cost. Finally, after what seemed like hours, I had made it to the top. I collapsed on the ground, gasping for air and writhing in pain. But I had done it. I had reached the summit. My joy was short-lived, however, as I realized that I still had to make my way down the mountain. The thought of navigating through the steep, rocky terrain with a bad ankle filled me with dread. But I had no choice. I knew that if I didn't make it down safely, I would be stranded on the mountain, alone and helpless. But first, rest. I set up camp, made a warm supper of ready-made meals, and hunkered down for the night. In the morning, after a light breakfast, I took a deep breath and began the low, slow descent. Every step was a struggle, and I had to stop frequently to rest and catch my breath. My ankle was now swollen to twice its normal size, and I was in excruciating pain. But I kept going. I focused on putting one foot in front of the other, ignoring the pain and the fear. I took it slow and steady, carefully picking my way down the mountain. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I made it back to the trailhead. I collapsed in the seat of my vehicle, exhausted and elated. I had managed to get down safely, despite the odds. As I sat there panting and sweating, I realized something. I had pushed myself to the limit. Leaving the challenge of survival, I returned to Everett and collect all my rewards at once. I was able to collect 91 bars in total, allowing me to get a whole array of supplies and gear. After organizing my gear, heading through the mill, and learning about the arena from Medea, I sit through Asher's speech, and I am elected the champion who would fight for the chance to see Asher. While the plot to this whole DLC is mediocre at best, as an entire rebellion relies on one person to not only survive the Steelyard, but to fight in an arena as well, I can't help but enjoy the nostalgia as I sign up for the fight. As the battle begins, radiated barrels are tossed in from above, and I charge forward. Of course, since we have some of the best gear you can obtain at this point in this DLC, they don't stand much of a chance. Fortunately, returning to Phaedra, we can get rid of our rads and heal up at the water fountain. Hide your homie for life! The second battle sees me fight the Bear Brothers. I use a little bit more strategy at first, before charging in with an auto axe after popping a few chems. My DR at this point is insane, so I can pretty well take any beating most humanoids put out. Despite this, I play it safe during the fight with Gruber as well, as I shoot his knees before he could even see me. While I love Fallout and know the games that I like to play are older, I would love to see The Last of Us style reactions from enemies in the future games. Imagine shooting someone's kneecaps and watching them crumble to the ground, clutching at their gun to launch the last few bullets in your direction. With Gruber dead, I have an odd conversation that reminds me of threesomes when one person is being left out and is just awkwardly sitting there. After that whole situation and fighting in the pit inside of the pit, I am granted permission to see Asher. Before that, though, we need to talk about the condition of downtown. A cesspool of slavers fills all of the ruined buildings that are characterized by several changes in elevation. Nothing much worthy of note here happens in terms of my actions, but the standards of living demonstrated, creating an interesting narrative. Despite treating their workers as trash, maybe they don't have everything figured out either, and are just trying to do what their leader tells them to. Originally, when I played this, I did the right thing by taking the gear to the rebellion so that everyone could have it. But this time around, things went a little bit different. Talking with Asher allows me to tell him what Mr. Wiener's plan was, and I am presented with all the details of the situation. The cure actually doesn't exist, and is instead in the middle of being produced by Sandra, the cure's mother. What I wasn't told about from the rebellion was that the cure was a baby. Asher's baby. With this knowledge, I had a decision to make. Do I steal the baby from Sandra, or do I end the rebellion? With my mind made up, I pay Medea a visit before traveling to the mill. While this is certainly framed as the more evil decision, I felt that with being straight of the vault, and Asher's convincing speech, that this character wouldn't have risked trying to throw an entire government when the chance of wealth and power is right around the corner. Besides, the cure isn't even done yet, meaning that even if the rebellion did get their hands on the baby, they likely wouldn't have had the resources to produce a cure. Regardless, I find myself in Warner's hideout and put him down before heading back to Asher. With the rebellion stopped and Asher pleased with my actions, he gives me permission to use the ammo machine and wander the pit as I see fit. A certain part of me finds this ending the correct one. If you listen to Asher's ramblings in full, he is someone who is left behind and is trying to do the right thing for their child. He expresses a semblance of remorse about how he has treated the slaves and hopes that things will change. All in all, I love this DLC. I wish they would have had to do more quests, and that the progression would have taken a little bit longer so that we could empathize more with the slaves, but at last, it was over before it truly began. Despite this not being a challenging challenge run, I hope that you delicious peeps enjoyed this video. I had a blast making it, and if you enjoyed watching it, check out my other videos. Thank you to my patrons for making these videos possible. You guys have blown me away with the support recently, and it really does mean a lot to me. With all that out of the way, I've been Owl, but do me a favor, will ya? Have a good one.